Mr. Ben Bashford.
Hi. Hello. My name is Ben Bashford and I'm here to talk about robots, which is really bizarre because talking about robots at conferences like this was never part of the big plan for me. I was supposed to be a musician. In the 90s, I was in a band called Search Engine with Karis, who you've already seen speak today. We made futuristic electronic music designed to be cut to vinyl and played by DJs through massive sound systems like that. We spent nearly every day in the studio. Our studio was a collection of digital and analog devices connected together, and they came together as a single unit to enable us to express ourselves in the form of music. So I suppose you could think of each track we made as being a bit like a 7-minute status update. We made music by abusing technology. My dad's an artist, and I think one of the most important creative lessons of my life came from him. He talks about creating controlled mistakes. He told me it's more important to learn the ways not to do something than the way to do it, because that allows you to discover your own path, to challenge dogma, and to create something entirely new. So as soon as we got a new piece of hardware or software, we tried to find its extremes. And once we'd done that, we'd experiment as much as possible through play. So what happens if you set this parameter to maximum? What happens if you set it to minimum? What happens if you route the output of this sound through this other one, or record it out to tape and then redigitize it, or even play it out the window and record it from the street? The crazier the better, really, because tangents delivered the best results. But most importantly, what happens to the texture and the quality of the sound, and how will that enable us to bring our music to life? So sonic texture was really interesting to us because it had such a massive effect on the emotional resonance of a piece of music. The same riff played using one sound would have such a different meaning depending on how it was processed and played, or a totally different meaning once you switched it over to another sound. So most of our time was experimenting with that. Our music had a function, so I definitely see what we did as being design. That's because we made our music with the constraints of our studio, the properties of vinyl, the format of DJ sets, and the tastes of the audience, and we had an iterative process too. So this is an old Dubplate. It's a prototype record that can only be played a few times before it degrades. You don't really see them these days, but we cut Dubplates of our music to test how it worked in context at clubs and parties, and we went back to the studio to make adjustments if necessary until we thought it was ready to press to vinyl. So the trick was to make records that fit snugly into DJs' mixes whilst pushing the boundaries of what was possible with the technology available to us at the time. There's a real sweet spot there between being so out there that nobody plays it and so boring that nobody buys it. So if you want to do something radically new, you needed to balance it with something fairly traditional so it still worked as part of a mix. But then in 1999, our studio was stolen, and because I wasn't insured, I was forced to find a new job. And luckily, my background in art and graphics and my knowledge of computers meant that I landed a job fairly quickly as a web designer. And back then, being a good web designer meant that you designed and coded, preferably by hand. So I used Photoshop, but a lot of my time was spent designing with BBEdit and a bunch of browsers, and that was a stronger connection with the stuff I was working with. And now, later in my career, I'm able to communicate with technical people in a way that doesn't make them think I'm a dick. And I think this practical knowledge, coupled with systems literacy, is the most important thing to have today. Because I believe that thinking by making is the only truly interactive way to design. And I find it amazing that it's being talked about recently like it's some kind of revelation. I've always thought that as designers we should be making things, not just drawing pictures of things. So it's 2012, and I've been doing this for quite a long time now. I still make things out of the internet, but my work is less about the web and more about tangible products and services. And so, for example, I've just finished working on some domestic hardware that has a combination of local and network software that can be accessed and controlled remotely with your smartphone, a tablet, or desktop via apps or via the web. Some people call it Internet of Things, some people call it ubiquitous computing or ubicomp, but they both feel a bit too academic and mean different things to different people. I like to say I design connected things. It's suitably vague, yet a bit descriptive, and doesn't really alienate people. So this talk is called All is Full of Love, and it's about the role of honesty and empathy in designing domestic products and services. So we start with a story about my dad. He was 80 this year, and sometimes I have conversations with him about technology and the stuff I do to remind myself how fast things are moving. So while I was on the phone to him, I told him that I watched the Olympics live on my phone, which is really quite odd if you think about it. And I could feel the gears grinding in his head, I could feel how confused he was, and I decided that it would probably take about a day to explain it properly to him, so I changed the subject. And it was at this point that I realised that compared to my dad, I am pretty much a cyborg or something. And based on the most recent figures, as we've heard already today, there's now over 1 billion smartphones out there. That means 1 in 7 people on the planet are cyborgs too. I don't know about you, but I quite like to compare myself to Robocop. And aside from the obvious stuff, like him being a dead man half made out of titanium with a wicked gun and stuff, there's a few things that I want to point out. Robocop can record and play back video. I can do that. Robocop knows where crimes are happening. That's just Foursquare with crimes instead of bars. Robocop can be tracked around the city using a handheld device. That's just Find My Friends. They can read and track Robocop's vital signs. I'm wearing a Fitbit, I've got internet connected scales, and I use Runkeeper and a ton of quantified self stuff. And I'm still not sure what to do with that data yet, but you know, it's still there. But I'll tell you what he can't do. He can't order groceries. He can't hail a taxi. He can't plot the best route across town if he was getting a bus. He couldn't call up reviews of nearby restaurants, and he certainly couldn't book a holiday, order a book, or catch up on last night's news. And he certainly couldn't identify the records being played at clubs either. So I'm a mundane cyborg. And in fact, my life has become so dependent on this little device that I think I'm close to being inseparable from it, which is really worrying. If I lost my phone, I wouldn't know how to get anywhere. I'd be late for everything, and I wouldn't be able to remember anyone's phone number to tell them. And if you go to a gig these days, you probably see a sea of phones held up in the air. These are people taking photos or video. You'll also see this LED uplighting effect known as blue face that comes from using a smartphone in the dark. And it used to be A&R men or journalists that get called that because they spent all their time texting. But now it's almost everyone. And as we've heard already, blue faces aren't in the here and now. The moment is somewhere else. They're either in a virtual space with the friends that they're texting, or in the future when they're looking at or discussing the pictures or video that they're making. And according to Alone Together, the recent book by Sherry Turkle from MIT, children all over the world are fighting with these devices for the attention of their parents. These little devices are demanding so much of our attention that I think the human part of us is losing control. Remember when I said half of me wasn't dead? I'm not really that sure. The situation crept up on us really, and if we'd have told people about this in 2004, we'd have freaked them out. Now, I hope this video comes out. Yeah. So this is a video from 2004 on Channel 4 in the UK.
I'm Cyborg.
Maybe not.
Technology. I'm wired to the internet 24 hours the rest of my life. A cyborg is part machine, part human. I'm a musician as well as a visual artist, as well as a live artist. I am the art object. I am art. I am media. I am creating media to my body.
I don't know if you can make it out, but he's got cameras and things attached to his head.
He's a live artist who wanders the streets, continually videoing and recording whatever happens to him. These are then relayed to his website. This is him videoing a melon.
How many pictures of melons do you think there are on Instagram at the moment? See, the thing is, that was 3 years before the iPhone. Rokeby there knew what was coming. He was just expressing his vision of 2013 using the technology of 2004. So he was about 9 years ahead, but in the wrong future. He was also seen as being a bit scary by most people because he was operating too far outside of the norm. Last year there was a guy called Venkatesh Rao, and he published this article on his blog about an idea he called the manufactured normalcy field. I recommend that you read it immediately. What he describes is this field that contains everything that we class as everyday life. It's a bit like a safety blanket, I suppose, because it helps us feel grounded in the now. It's why things on the whole don't feel that advanced compared to 2004, even though we've just seen how far ahead we are. He describes this giddy, nauseous feeling that when something happens to disrupt or break the field. I've been getting that feeling more and more recently, and I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. And this feeling is also called future shock. So future shock comes from a book written by a writer called Alvin Toffler in the 60s, and it's about an overwhelming psychological effect of what he calls too much change in too short a period of time. So some of the stuff that I post to my blog and some of the stuff that James Bridle is posting to the New Aesthetic Tumblr blog is exposing the parts of the present that break the normalcy field and cause that future shock vertigo feeling. So every now and then I look at the archive view of the New Aesthetic blog. It's like a wall of future shock. It's a proper rush. And some people, like me and my friends, and probably quite a few of us here, are addicted to that feeling. It's why I love hard sci-fi. It's why I like being in dark warehouses listening to music that sounds like I'm eating metal chips. And it's why the future is an obsession for me. I love stuff that gives me vertigo, and it's like catnip for some clients too, because like me, they're addicted to the feeling it gives them because they're so keen to discover the next big thing. It's probably why they got into technology in the first place, but we have to be really careful because future shock isn't a good thing. It makes normal people freak out. And that fear and confusion can lead to dangerous negative backswings like Luddism, which was a destructive reaction against technology that really didn't do anybody any good, or the more recent obsession with the good old days that never really existed. I think that's a result of future shock too. Or people in the UK burying their rubbish as a response to discovering that there were RFID chips in their recycling bins. And I'm not saying anyone reads it or anything, but the UK's Daily Mail is an amazing source of these adverse reactions to the normalcy field being broken. So while we're designing the future, we don't want to disturb normality too much. We want to work within it. But if we want to be able to sell the things we make, improve the human condition, or just have interesting jobs, we need to be able to stretch it a bit with everything that we make. And this isn't a new idea. Raymond Loewy, the father of industrial design, knew about this. He lived by a principle that he called MAYA, which stands for most advanced yet acceptable. He was incredibly consumer focused and worked to design things that were acceptable to the public while still pushing the boundaries of the recently possible. He said this, he said, "The adult's public taste is not necessarily ready to accept the logical solutions to their requirements if the solution implies too vast a departure from what they've been conditioned to accepting as the norm." And two of my favourite designers, Jasper Morrison and Naoto Fukasawa, have a manifesto that describes their idea of things that are super normal. They talk about products that are designed to cause as little disruption as possible whilst upgrading the existing framework of normality. Jasper Morrison says, "Design, which is supposed to be responsible for the man-made environment we all inhabit, seems to be polluting it instead. Its historic and idealistic goal, to serve industry and the happy consumer masses at the same time, of conceiving things easier to make and better to live with, has been sidetracked." Now that's really interesting to me, especially given the current rush to make awesome disruptive stuff. So I believe it's our job as designers to embrace and understand the things that cause future shock, whilst normalizing it for people so they don't freak out. And to describe that in UX terms, I see that as being like designing wayfinding or signposts. We should be helping people find their way into the future without feeling disoriented or scared as we move forward as a species. And most of the future shock feeling I've been getting recently comes from software agents. So algorithms, engines, spiders, or whatever you want to call them, automated bits of software that have motives and behavior of their own. Things like Amazon's recommendation algorithms, Google's AdWords system and their search spiders, spam bots, IM bots, Twitter bots, things like Clout and its terrifying military cousin called the disposition matrix, to the bots that Wikipedia used to clear up vandalism. Kevin Slavin's talk, TED talk that he gave is a great place to start if you want to kind of find out more about this. But the more our lives become digitized, the more they become intertwined with bots. And at the moment, they're mostly processing and creating data. But as more and more products connect to the network, these bits of software are going to start being able to control physical stuff. So services like If This Then That are very basic algorithm engines, and they're beginning to include physical inputs and outputs with things like Belkin's Wemo remote switches and sensors. You can make them turn things on and off in your house when your phone leaves a ring fence, or email you when they detect motion. And products like the Nest Thermostat use learning algorithms to help you save energy. This thing studies how you behave and then sets itself up accordingly. And this quote is from a recent issue of Monocle magazine. It's from an article about the Unmanned Systems North America Trade Fair. It's the place that you go if you're in the market for the type of flying robots that are probably killing people right now. But it's talking about drones that do housework. And of course they mean things like Roomba, Honda's Mimo lawnmower, and sooner or later these things will have wireless network connections and processing capability that lives on the internet. And how long do you really think it is before domestic robots like this are as common as toasters or kettles or mobile phones? And it'll be sooner than you think, I reckon, and we're probably going to need to modify our surroundings to accommodate them. You can't really see that picture there, but it's a cat flap, really. It'd be a bit like when we got indoor toilets, or when we changed the layout of our living room to accept TVs. And we may end up needing to make some of these things that are as usable for other robots as they are for humans, which is going to be really, really hard to come to terms with, because I think the user in user experience isn't necessarily going to be human for much longer. So we'll need to start designing for user agents. And I say user agents because I see this stuff as being a bit like SEO for the physical world or accessibility for drones. And what about the other inhabitants of our homes? How will our pets respond when these things start moving about of their own accord? And some of these products are going to need to talk to each other to do their jobs. They're going to be collaborating and communicating behind our backs in language that we don't understand, and stuff will be magically happening around us and it'll be almost psychedelic, and people are going to freak out if we don't do this right. Which is why I feel the recent discussion about the disappearing interface is a little misguided. Because I feel the pursuit of magical or seamless is wrong. I believe that we should be accentuating the connections, making these things talk in the open in ways that we can comprehend or even enjoy. People seem to be so keen to make magical or seamless interfaces, but magic is dependent on the participant being unaware of what's going on. When I was young, I used to watch this program called Catweasel. It was about a time-traveling wizard. And he accidentally travels from the 11th century to 1969, where he mistakes all technology for magic. He calls it electricery. And I think that's such a good word that I'm going to roll it into my design vocabulary, because magic really is pulling the wool over people's eyes, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're making smart people, not smart things. So like James Bridle, I believe it's our job as modern designers to help demystify these things by accentuating their motives and behaviour so people can understand what's going on. This will give them the chance to opt in or out of being affected by them, and the things we make should wear their hearts on their sleeves if we want them to be welcomed into people's homes. Because I believe the pursuit of the seamless or invisible comes from late capitalist need to be efficient and productive and downright dirty and ruthless. And I don't think our homes should be built around these values at all. I really don't want to be living in a home that's designed with the principles of the workplace. It'd be a bit like having your boss around all the time, and I think it's this pursuit of efficiency that had led to our devices being so demanding. Because of course the thing about work is that it needs your full attention. So if we're making domestic technology, let's make sure it's domesticated. So designing the behaviour of domestic algorithms and robots is going to be a hugely important thing. My dad plays his computer at chess, and he's happy to tell me about how he talks to it. And I swear at my computer all the time. I don't know about you. It's because we think that computers come to life when we interact with them. And there's this book called The Media Equation that explores this, and it's based on years of research. The authors came to the conclusion that when people are interacting with a computer, for the moment of that interaction, they believe it to be fundamentally human and social in nature. I believe that. This quote is from an Amazon review of the Mint floor cleaner. It's a software bot in a motorised mop that drives around your floor. And the most popular review describes it in terms of being like a nurse and chipper. They're seeing the way it moves around and interpreting that as personality, just like they would handwriting or calligraphy. And it'd be really interesting to hear if the way that this robot behaves is a product of design or pure engineering. If it really is a product of engineering, I think it's something design should take ownership of as quickly as possible. So we interpret these complex systems in human terms because we need to normalise them to help us cope with the fact that we're interacting with something that's not human. And I believe that this goes right back through history. I think it's why we have things like the north wind and house sprites or ghosts, and it's why we project human forms onto our deities. It's probably why sailors refer to ships as she, and why often Earth is referred to as Mother Earth. It's just a coping mechanism. So given the fact that people will project human characteristics onto domestic robots, whether we like it or not. Maybe we should stop thinking about what are we designing and start thinking about who are we designing. And as designers, we're used to working with personas that describe users, but what about developing personas to describe the product itself? System personas. What does it need? How does it feel about it? What does it do about it? And how does it do that? This could be really powerful when designing the behavior of domestic robots, but where can we draw inspiration from? We could use people, but we need to be really careful about that. This is the Uncanny Valley. For those of you that haven't heard about it yet, this diagram shows the more realistically human something gets, the harder it is for us to cope with, the scarier it becomes. And I think that's because the closer to human things are, the harder it is for us to normalize them by mapping our own personality to them. This is what lives in the Uncanny Valley. It's not a new problem. It's something that robotics, film, CGI, and video games designers have been struggling with for years. But I think humanoid robots are a bit of a red herring, because the robot was invented by a Czech playwright called Karel Čapek for one of his plays, and he gave them human forms so they could be played by actors, so they could walk on and off the stage. He called them robots, which I believe is Czech for something like forced labour, and it stuck. So why bother climbing the hill at all? If you ask me, this is the point we should be aiming for here. I call it Canny Base Camp because it'd be much easier for us to achieve and much easier on the people and animals that need to live with the things that we make. It's something that Scott McCloud explains in his book Understanding Comics. He shows us that the fewer details that we put into something, into a face, it means it's easier for someone to map their own personality to it, and it creates a stronger connection. It's a really powerful thing and still gives us a bit of control. I call this principle minimum viable person. The biggest question, I think, is what's the least we can do? What could minimum viable person be? So the robot Gertie from the film Moon, you can't really see the rest of it, uses a simplified face that encourages us to anthropomorphize him, even though he looks like an office printer. But his square boxiness also allows him to have Kevin Spacey's voice without dropping into the valley. The thing is, human faces are really attention-grabbing because we're naturally drawn to them. So do we have to use faces at all? My friend Tom Armitage's Tower Bridge Twitter bot is really interesting in that it refers to itself in the first person. Maybe something calling itself I is enough. He's made part of London Talk, and it doesn't really seem that unnatural. I have a pet bot. My friend Henry made him for me, and he feeds off the things I say on Twitter. That's his Twitter handle there if you want to follow him. Most of the things he says doesn't make any sense at all, but your brain really wants them to. Your brain kind of fills in the gaps and gives it quite a lot of character. If you message him, he'll talk to you, and it's been said that he often makes a lot more sense than I do. I think it feels like my subconscious speaking. And we've made two bots that are in love with each other. Back in the early days of Twitter, there was a couple that tweeted sweet nothings at each other for months before they realised that it was public, and they stopped. But that body of text is still there. So we made two bots, one of them that feeds off of each Twitter stream, and now they'll carry on loving each other in their sort of special robot wonky way forever. Sort of gets you right here, really. But cheesiness aside, I reckon we could be much more abstract than this. I think that in some cases MVP could be as simple as a single movement, a change of lighting or a sound, a one-bit expressive interface. So Apple's Sleep Light communicates such a simple message by pulsating at the rate of a sleeping human's breathing. And do you know that Apple actually have a patent on that? Even the idea that a computer sleeping is interesting. But what else could you communicate with this light just by speeding it up or slowing it down? And I believe that if we take this principle of simplified or abstract expression to the extremes, we may end up creating interfaces that we can read almost subconsciously. They could be hidden in plain sight, not invisible, not magical, just part of the furniture, maybe literally. And the subconscious is hugely interesting because it's so high bandwidth. You know when you're with your best friend and it feels like you can have a conversation without saying anything at all? Well, that's empathy. And empathy is about noticing things without being told. It's about a deep, calm understanding. And I believe that these simple one-bit interactions may encourage us to empathize with technology. And I need to be clear that when I talk about empathic interfaces, I don't mean that machines should try to empathize with us. Domestic robots could kind of simulate companionship with each other, but they can't, won't, and shouldn't love us back, because it would be a lie. And it's my belief that empathy is a human thing, and that it should always be a human thing, and that any empathy or soul expressed by a piece of technology should be down to it channeling the designer's own empathy. And that will require a special set of skills. Because I feel that the design of these calm, expressive interfaces for the home is more aligned to making music than it is to science. It's about making design decisions based on emotional resonance. And that comes from developing a deep understanding and respect for the materials and processes of both digital and physical manufacture. It's about a return to craft, a return to thinking by making. So I believe the calm, connected home I hope for will need designers to become craftspeople again, to go beyond the skills they have now to a level of technical eloquence and modesty that will enable them to put their life and soul into the things that they make. They'll have a deep knowledge of and understanding of both digital and physical materials, flipping between them for reasons above practicality and efficiency, and they'll be able to make things that feel natural and normal even though they're incredibly high tech, without resorting to being a retro pastiche of the good old days. And they'll be curious. They'll use playful experimentation to create controlled mistakes because they'll believe that it's as important to learn the ways not to do stuff as it is to do it. And this will allow them to discover their own way of working, to challenge dogma, and to create something new. They'll embrace the vertigo of future shock and seek out new materials and tools. But they'll be able to push things forwards while showing restraint, helping the future happen at a comfortable pace by creating the necessary cultural signposts that help prevent people freaking out as they move forwards as a species. They'll need to be able to express themselves through technology, and that will be really hard. But I think it's worth it. Because I believe that taking this approach to domestic computing will allow us to take the internet out from behind glass and embed it into the world around us as wonderful objects that can bring us the benefits of the network whilst encouraging us to engage with our surroundings, reconnecting us with the people and events all around us. It will mean that we can stop being cyborgs and start being human again. Thank you.